And if you will please give your attention to this short
I found this
video.
on the web.
Shh. Thank you, Siri.
There's someone down here.
That is so funny. And my sound is turned off. How did it override that? Thank you, Siri.
This meeting will be conducted as a Zoom webinar to allow for public participation and comments. The Contra Costa Transportation Authority does not condone hate speech in any form. We continually strive to make life better for all members of our community and create an atmosphere where everyone feels a sense of safety and belonging. We ask that anyone who wishes to speak does so with civility, respect, and kindness for others. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organizations, but providing such information is voluntary. Citizens participating in person wishing to speak should submit a public speaker card to the clerk. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Written public comments received in accordance with the teleconferencing special notice on the meeting agenda will be provided to the members. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand in Zoom or submit a public speaker card, and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Thank you, Terry Ann. And will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Fideli?
Here.
Commissioner Haskew?
Here.
Commissioner Kelly? Here. Commissioner Meadows?
Here.
Commissioner/Representative Nowak?
Here.
Commissioner Sauce?
Here.
Vice Chair Arnrich?
Here.
Representative Foley?
Present.
Okay, we have Representative Peoples attending remotely as a member of the public, and we do have Chair Glover and Commissioners Carlson, Perkins, and Thorpe absent, and we do have a quorum.
Great. And we wish Chair Glover speedy recovery as he's a little under the weather. The next item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. And if you are if you are online, please mute. Otherwise, please stand and join me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And this will take us to public comment, and this is an opportunity for anyone to speak on anything that's not on tonight's agenda. If you want to speak on anything specifically on the agenda, we will call for public comment as each of those items come up for public review. At this time, Terry Ann, do we have any online speakers or any written comments?
No public comments, written or verbal.
Great, thank you. So we'll close public comment on this, and this will take us to our consent. We're going to do presentations first, and there are no presentations. Then it'll take us to our consent calendar. The consent calendar are items that are considered routine, can be acted on in one motion. However, if there's anybody in the audience or our virtual audience that would like to remove one, please say so now. Terry Ann, do we have anybody raising their hands?
No virtual or written public comment.
Okay, and we'll bring it back to the authority board. Any commissioners wish to remove anything? If not, is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
It's been moved by Sauce, seconded by Haskins. Askew, you please call the roll.
Commissioner Fideli?
Aye.
Commissioner Haskew?
Here. Yeah. Yes, please.
Yes. Commissioner Kelly? Yes. Commissioner Meadows?
Yes.
Commissioner Nowak?
Yes.
Commissioner Sauce?
Yes.
Vice Chair Arnrich?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Carlson, Perkins, Thorpe, and Chair Glover absent.
Okay, great, thank you. And now we are going to go to our regular agenda items. And we are going to hear, if it's all right with everybody, it's been requested to do agenda item number 9A from the Planning Committee first, due to staff from the Water Emergency Transportation Authority presenting and providing an update on the Richmond Ferry service performance and financial outlook. And this will be presented by Ying Smith. Ying, welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.
I think your microphone needs to be on.
Make sure the green button's there in the middle.
All right, can you hear me better now? Okay, good evening again, Ying Smith. Here I'm going to actually co-present with the colleagues from WIDA, and I'm going to just do an introduction, and I'm going to turn that to Seamus to start. So just a bit background, the Richmond to San Francisco ferry service began in January 2019. The Measure J expenditure plan designated that 2.25% of the total Measure J revenue be allocated to Program 22B, which is the ferry service in West County. The service is operated by the San Francisco Bay Area Water Emergency Transmission Authority, also known as WIDA. This evening, we have WIDA staff going to give you a presentation on the service performance as well as the financial outlook. So, Seamus, I know you're going to start this presentation.
Great, thank you, Lee. Appreciate it. Thanks for accommodating us virtually. We'd, of course, prefer to be there in person. The stars didn't align for us to do that tonight, but we're happy to be here. Thanks for allowing us some time to talk about the Richmond service and how it's performing as a part of the WIDA system. Richmond service is, of course, one of our newest services, came online right before the pandemic. Mike Gowerty, who I'll turn it over to in just a bit, is here, our manager of planning and development. He'll walk through some data and details about how the service is performing. But before he does that, I just want to provide a little bit of flavor. We have a business plan process that we're going through right now, and that includes a service vision for WIDA that's a long-term service vision. It's a vision that we are looking out to 2050 to try and accommodate. And we're having lots of conversations around the region with communities that would like to have ferry service added to their community, expansion plans for water transit. It's a popular way to commute around the Bay Area, and we always use Richmond as an example of a way to do it right. Richmond and Contra Costa County really made it easy for us to add ferry service to Richmond and make it a part of our network. And the best thing that the county did is to include it in an expenditure plan when you move forward with a half-cent sales tax. That's made it possible for us to operate Richmond and to make it so as successful as it has been. It's been one of the services in our network that's been the fastest to recover in terms of percentage of pre-pandemic ridership, and we just wouldn't have been able to do it without the contributions, the local contributions from the county. So looking forward, we're looking forward to continuing that success. We think there's a lot of things that we can do with the Richmond service to improve on it, to make it more successful, to increase ridership beyond what it is today. One of those things is to convert it to a zero emission service. And that's something that WIDA doesn't have to do necessarily in order to meet the state's air quality requirements. We can continue to operate diesel equipment and add diesel particulate filters to our fleet if we wanted to go in that direction, but we've decided, and our board has decided, that we need to move forward with a zero emission future, and the Richmond service is one of the services that can accommodate a battery electric ferry and operate that service with zero emission propulsion in the future. We have some progress that has been made just recently on that transition. MTC just last week awarded us with a $3.75 million grant to bring power to the Richmond terminal. so that we can use that power to charge electric ferries and propel electric ferries in the future, and also to provide charging opportunities for automobiles, for passengers who are using electric cars to access the terminal. So even though Richmond is in phase 3 of our electrification program, we're already making progress on getting that done and making the service zero emission. A number of other things that we know we can do to improve the service, but before we get to that, I want to hand it over to Mike so he can talk to you about some of the data and how successful the service has been so far. Go ahead, Mike.
Thanks, Seamus. I've got a brief deck here that I'll pull up and go into slideshare mode. Are folks in the boardroom able to see that?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Before I jump in, I just want to acknowledge, if it wasn't obvious already, January 2019 was an incredibly challenging time in retrospect to start a ferry service. And as we go through these slides that show some of the ridership data, I want to note a few things to keep in mind. The first is it's practice at WIDA to really look at the launch of a service is requiring up to 10 years in some instances to fully realize the ridership potential of the service. And this is a few factors that are specific to ferries. They generally draw from a relatively large area, a relatively small amount of people from a relatively large area. And so what we've noticed over time, and we've seen this with South San Francisco, we've seen this with our harbor-based service, it takes a while for ridership to ramp up. And this is because people need to make locational decisions to live in proximity to a ferry terminal, and also eventually, choose employers that are proximate to the destinations that we serve. So as that ramp-up period was getting underway, unfortunately, 12 months after the launch of service, COVID hit. And that was a massive disruption. Obviously, there's no overstating the impact that had on transportation or life in general. But in particular for this service, we had some momentum, some good results in early ridership over that first 12 months, and then service was ultimately suspended. And which leads us back to today and where we're at now, which is the recovery phase. And so in the context of this ramp up period for this service, we're also facing this massive uncertainty about what the future looks like. We know travel demand patterns are shifting. Huge questions about whether we get back to normal and if that's even possible, and what does a new normal look like. So just a few things to keep in mind as we go through some of the initial ridership numbers for the service. So in comparing the service offering from 2019 to where we are today, obviously there are significant changes that have been made. And a lot of these are rooted in WIDA's pandemic recovery program, which was the initiative that we undertook in 2021 to relaunch our services following the suspension or the reduction in service immediately following the pandemic. In general, that program sought to do two things. First, in terms of fares, across the board, we lowered our fares, and the goal there was to create parity with bus and rail options that operate in the same corridors as our services, to essentially take price out of the equation for people's decision to drive or use the ferry or use any other mode available to them. The second was restructuring the services that we offered. And you'll see here in the slide, the result of that was an increase in the number of weekday trips provided. We went from 12 in 2019, 24 in 2021, and ultimately 2023, and then the implementation of weekend service as well. As I mentioned previously, in terms of fares, we went from a fare that was more comparable to the Vallejo service, which really represented a premium for other bus services and rail services available to Richmond residents, to a fare, again, more comparable to those bus and rail options, $460 as of 2023. So the net result of these changes, we saw an increase in ridership from January to November, a comparable time period from 2019 to 23. That increase in ridership, again, was part due to the increase in service. That increase in service resulted in an increase in the budget for the service. So we went from about $4.4 $4.5 million in terms of operating budget in 2019 to just over double that in 2023. So that additional budget in combination with lower fares has brought the fare box recovery for the service down. So in layperson's non-transportation expert terms, that means fare revenue is covering less of the operational cost of the services, and so other sources need to kind of be brought in to backfill that. And in this instance, what allowed us to do that for the Richmond service and keep that Measure J subsidy constant were the federal COVID relief funds available to us. So there was monies provided by the federal government, which allowed WIDA to bring the service back at an enhanced level that it had operated before, all the while lowering fares. This slide shows weekday ridership. And as we noted earlier, we've seen an increase in ridership from 2019 to 2023. So 2019, we were averaging about 700 passengers a day. Today in 2023 is just over 900. And on good weather days, it's peaking well over 1,000. So in terms of recovery, this is one of the few transit services, the only transit service, WIDA, one of the few transit services in the entire region that can say it's actually fully recovered its ridership from pre-pandemic conditions. In terms of peer comparisons, the Richmond service, this chart on the right, is outperforming the other most recent expansion service WIDA undertook, the South San Francisco service, and it's comparable to the harbor-based service. A service that, while in still recovery, is an established service and has gone through that kind of ramp-up phase for building ridership and has been in place for over 20 years at this point. As I mentioned, one of the changes from 2023 compared to 2019 was the implementation of weekend service. And what we're showing here is the weekend ridership for Richmond on the left. This shows boardings per trip, but daily boardings, again, on those good weather days, we're seeing over 1,200 riders on some of the trips. On bad weather days, down into the lower hundreds. So there's quite a bit of variability here. In general, it's healthy ridership, but it's modest in comparison to some of the other weekend services that we operate. But I will note that the level of service compared to those services is quite smaller in terms of number of trips and frequency. This slide kind of shows a visualization of the service restructuring strategy that was part of our pandemic recovery program. So in 2019, the service plan and schedule for the service was really kind of the traditional way ferry service has been delivered historically by not only WIDA, but other operators on the bay. Really a peak period service focused on kind of your 9 to 5 weekday commuters from the suburbs into San Francisco. So what we did with the service reconfiguration as part of the pandemic recovery program is add trips. So we maintained the trips in the peak, and then we added service during the off-peak periods, so the midday and the evening. And the goal of this was really to broaden the market appeal of the services, to appeal to people that didn't have those 9 to 5 weekday schedules, like construction workers or service workers that travel during the shoulder periods, to give them an option to ride the service as our board strategy to promote equity throughout the system and ultimately increase the diversity of our ridership so the demographics of our service look closer to the underlying communities that we serve. This slide is a visualization of how that strategy has worked. And what we're seeing on the left is the 2019 kind of trip volumes by time of day, so clustered in the peak periods. And then what we're seeing in 2023 is a distribution of ridership more evenly spread throughout the day. And so this has allowed us, by attracting new riders in the off-peak periods, to achieve recovery, because you'll see the volumes during the peak period in 2023 are quite lower than 2019. And this reflects, I think, what we all understand to be happening, which is the return to work pace in the Bay Area is lagging other regions in the country. And this is part of the recovery dynamic in the Bay Area where the travel demand for peak period services just isn't there to the extent it was in 2019. So we see this as, kind of a validation of the approach in the pandemic recovery program. And, the results of WIDA's recovery in relation to other regional operators, we've actually outperformed some of the regional operators in terms of bringing back our ridership to 2019 levels. We're about 60 to 70% recovered. Other operators are about 50 to 60 regional operators in the Bay Area. And we think the strategy of offering service, enhancing service in the off periods was really central to achieving that result. So this slide shows the trip boardings in the Richmond to San Francisco direction. It's very dynamic in the other direction, San Francisco to Richmond. Shifting gears just a bit, we've got a couple slides kind of summarizing the financial outlook of WIDA, specifically as it relates to Regional Measure 3. And so great news last year, after a long wait, the court case for Regional Measure 3 was finally resolved. And for WIDA, that meant a relatively large infusion of not only capital funds, but additional operating subsidy to support our services. So for WIDA, the release of Regional Measure 3 funds meant ultimately $300 million in new capital funding available to support expansion and enhancement of our existing services. And then on an annual basis, up to $35 million in operating funds available on top of the roughly 17.3 operating subsidy we get from Regional Measure 2 and Regional Measure 1. An important provision of that money, unlike Regional Measure 1 and Regional Measure 2, it's not use it or lose it. So if we don't use all that $35 million in a given year, we're allowed to essentially bank it, and at that point we can use it for future operating purposes or capital purposes per provisions of the legislation. So the effect of RM3 being available last year has had the impact of allowing WIDA to essentially avert the fiscal cliff that nearly every other regional operator in the Bay Area is facing right now. And so this shows a summary of the 5-year operating plan that WIDA is required to prepare and submit for Regional Measure 3 to MTC. And as you can see under the green bar in the table, we're putting that RM3 operating money to immediate use. And this is really the way in which we're able to kind of step away from the fiscal cliff that nearly every other agency is facing. So what we're showing here in fiscal year 24, in order to provide the operating subsidy we need to balance the operating budget, we're going to program $8.7 million in RM3 money. And that money quickly escalates in terms of size and volume over the 5-year period. In FY27, we're up to about 32 million. I'm sorry, FY28, we're up to about 33.8 million. So really fortunate as an agency that this money came through when it did. The discussion about whether to cut service or not would have been a lot more straightforward had it not. Oops. So while we're able to avert that fiscal cliff in the short term, it looms large in the long term, essentially putting us in a similar situation longer term as most other transit agencies in the Bay Area. In terms of what our assumptions are for expenditures for the RM3 money available to us, we're going to see a need, and you saw that in the previous slide with that 33.8 million required in year 5 to balance the operating budget. We're going to need that money to continue supporting the existing services as recovery proceeds. We'll also continue the core provisions of the pandemic recovery program. So those lower fares that were initially offered as a temporary measure by the WIDA board, they were made permanent last year as part of WIDA's new 5-year fare program and fare policy. And so those will continue into the future. The RM3 money will also support the implementation of a limited set of near-term expansion projects that are underway by WIDA. So these include new service along the San Francisco waterfront, Mission Bay, and the Berkeley to San Francisco service. And then importantly, as Seamus mentioned earlier, it allows us to get a start on the very important work required to electrify the system. And so this gives us the money to provide the shoreside infrastructure and retrofit some of the diesel vessels to zero emission technology. The implication, the financial outlook, given this program, again, identifies in the longer term a fiscal cliff situation for WIDA. Our projections show the RM3 money available to us being fully subscribed by year 2036. We have identified a limitation in terms of new expansion projects that we'll be able to undertake because of that funding limitation. And of note, with the Richmond Measure J money for Richmond for the Richmond Ferry Service set to expire in FY32, it just reinforces the point that long term, WIDA and its partners need to be really working together to identify future funding to support not only the existing services, but the expansion of water transit on San Francisco Bay as well. And that concludes the presentation. I'm happy to, if you have any questions, the board may have.
Great. Michael, thank you. Seamus, thank you as well. Questions from the board? Paul?
Yes, thank you. Last month you gave a presentation to WIGTAC as well on the long-term financial, and you made a promise to come back to us with a few proposals about how you might be able to change things to make that long financial road a little easier. Can you reiterate what that is and what that, I'm assuming whatever you produce for WIGTAC, you'll deliver to CCTA?
Yeah, that's right. We heard from WIGTAC that they would like us to produce some scenarios. What kind of service cuts would we need to move forward with now to extend service and stretch Measure J funding for that additional 2 years that would be needed to potentially get it to the next, hopefully, replacement of Measure J funding, if and when that happens. And we will be doing that. I think we cautioned that at the time that the way that WIDA services interline throughout the bay, it's not possible to just say we're going to take a crew out of the day and that's going to result in a cut to Richmond service but not impact any other routes on our system. The services really are interlined. So it probably looks more like cutting all midday service or all weekends. It's going to be more of a larger cut in order to achieve that result. But we want to make sure we're giving some options that are realistic and meet the direction that the WIGTAC board gave us. And so we will be coming back and presenting those.
Thank you. And is that about 2 or 3 months from now or 6 months from now?
I don't expect it will take us that long
Okay.
to respond, but we do.
Okay.
We haven't set on a time frame.
And last question, at the WIGTAC meeting, I believe, if he's on the line, Commissioner Peoples asked the question about the parking lot, which is free right now for people who park there. Is there any plans to charge for parking at that parking lot?
It's not a parking facility that we control. We do have parking that at our other facilities, and there are costs associated with that. The landside facilities, like parking lots, are generally run by the jurisdiction, owned by the jurisdiction, and parking fares are governed by the jurisdiction that we operate in. Alameda parking facilities are currently free, and they're thinking about, they've decided and they're going through the process of beginning to charge at those parking facilities, and I believe all other facilities that are adjacent to WIDA terminals currently charge for parking.
And does that paid parking impact what you might be suggesting as far as revenue going forward financially?
We have not seen any parking revenue generated and then offered as a way to pay for WIDA service throughout the system. And we have not had any discussions with the city of Richmond about using whatever revenues generated.
And I meant, will it hurt your service if people have to park at the parking lot?
It's a fine line. I think that's it's not a bad thing, and what the policies that we need to balance there are making sure that the cost isn't prohibitive and prevents riders from using the system. It's also something that can be positive if it encourages people to choose a different mode of travel for their first and last mile to the ferry terminal.
Great. Thank you, Seamus.
Yes. Chris?
Yeah, thank you, Seamus and Mike. I'm also on WCTAC, and so I've seen this presentation before. And I really thank WIDA for cutting the fares in half to allow, as you put it, service workers to come and take the ferry. I recall back in 2021 when it started up, Kevin Connolly from WIDA came and said that when he was riding the ferry one day from Richmond to San Francisco, he was the only person who was not in a uniform or in scrubs. And what that's done in the area is it's just allowed a lot of people who need to go in at different times for various jobs, who do wear uniforms, to go and be part of the ferry. So it's not just an elite service anymore, and that has increased ridership and awareness of the Richmond Ferry. So it's still kind of in a building phase, as I see it, and maybe over the next 2 or 3 years, we're going to see how this really all shakes out. So again, it's a fantastic service. I'm one of those off-peak riders, because I don't work in San Francisco anymore, but I go in and take the 10 or 11 ferry and then come back around, 4 or 5. It's a great way to travel, and I love it, and I think everybody in West County who rides on it really appreciates it as well. So thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, Renata?
Thank you, Seamus and Mike, thanks for the presentation. Very, very helpful, very educational. Just so I'm clear, with respect to the Richmond Ferry, the problem that we're trying to solve for here is making up that 2-year gap, funding gap. Is that basically it? Between 34 and 36?
So maybe CCTA staff will start with that. I think that is, we first want to share that financial projection with you, or so-called the runway, and we do appreciate WIDA staff doing that projection so early, so we have time to look at the different options. And first want to share with you where we stand. If the assumptions all stay, all the assumptions in terms of cost and revenue, that includes not having new revenue, the runway will end in 2032. That is 2 years short of the 2034 when Measure J ends. We do want to hear from you whether you want to look at some options. Just want to clarify that staff is not asking you to make a decision on service change or service cut. We want to see if you have interest in seeing some options as with our colleagues to go prepare some options for you later hopefully in a couple of months to present those options to you for your consideration.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the clarification. Thank you for correcting my misstatement of the dates. But you both spoke about cuts in service, and is it correct that that's an option, but that's not the only thing that's going to be explored?
For sure, it's an option, and it is no problem at all for us to look at options for doing that. But we also could maintain service, and we could utilize the sources of funding that are available, Measure J and RM3, which has replaced the federal COVID relief funds, to maintain the service that we have out there, allow it an opportunity to continue to grow, and we expect that it will. And there's a long time between now and 2032, and we're going to have hopefully a regional transportation funding measure sometime in the middle, and we think that there's potential for other actions to occur that will give us more resources to be able to maintain service over that 2-year time frame. And it is certainly an option to wait and see how those things play out before we decide to make any cuts.
And Mike, you said something intriguing, which is that you were hoping that the riders look like the communities that you serve. And what work have you all done to understand who your riders are, what the demographic is, and what it looks like in the post-COVID world?
I'll let Seamus speak to some of the survey efforts we have underway, but just to reiterate, the central strategy on the fares was to take pricing out of the equation, and to allow people that have options. I could take the bus, I could take BART, I could take the ferry, to not let them feel excluded from the ferry because of this price premium. And so that's one component. And the other component was just diversifying the schedule, and hopefully meeting the needs of people like the construction workers, like the service workers that don't necessarily travel in the traditional 9 to 5 times. And we have a variety of survey efforts that support identifying the specific needs of passengers in terms of schedules and first last mile connections. And Seamus, if you have an idea of what's coming down the pike and some of those, I don't necessarily have my finger on the pulse of it right now.
Well, I would just say one new thing that we're going to be doing on the survey and market research front that has less to do with understanding who our current riders are, but more to do with understanding where the potential for ridership growth is that we'll be doing market research surveys to non-riders throughout our service area and understanding what the barriers to entry are, understanding what we can do to make the service something that they would utilize, and understanding from our riders also what would make them want to utilize it more. So we expect to have the results of that effort available sometime this summer.
So that'll be done in tandem with this analysis of potential adjustments.
We should have the information available in sufficient time before we need to make a decision about any adjustments for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Renata. Maybe, Mike, I have 2 questions, just because I've not seen the presentation. And by the way, it's a fantastic service, your success story. You took a bold step, and it worked. And I think other agencies in the past have done that, but they're so strapped for cash these days, they can't do that as an option. So I think you guys were brilliant, going from 174,000 rides up to 198. But on that 198,000, Mike, I'm trying to get the numbers right, because you showed a chart that showed the schedule and it showed the number of riders. That at 198, that's assuming you only have about 10% ridership on the weekends and the bulk is during the week. You're about 900 riders a day, and your actual listing of people, that was just barely 400. So I'm wondering, where's the gap in that? And if you divided the 198,000 by 365, assuming everybody's riding at the same pace every day, that's almost 550. So what you showed was way less. So I'm wondering what that gap is.
Well, I apologize. It's a little difficult for me to follow the math on the fly there. I know it was a January to November period. I'm happy to, provide some backup on the numbers. It's just hard for me to, without looking at the raw data in front of me, to kind of answer, to give you more information on that right now.
Okay. Well, and here's why. A lot of agencies, and I'm not saying you're one of those, everybody's obfuscating their numbers. They're doing them in ways to make it look different. They're trying to use a daily rate, a post. There's a lot of ways to do it. If you post that you have 198,000 riders in 1 year through November, you can start to do that math. But you showed a slide that was real simple. It showed the schedule and the number of people per hour of 2019 compared to today. Obviously, you have more. It's just the total on that whole day is less than 50% of what your daily ridership has to be. So figure that out. I'm just saying, I can do that in my head. I can see that. The second thing, and again, I don't quite understand it. Your budget for the this year is 10.25 million for the Richmond ferry. But when you put up the RM3 chart, it begins to get lost. It shows the RM3 funding at about 8.8 million, and then in 4 years it jumps up to 33 million. And that says under the expenditure line. So what's happening why isn't that going up at 3 or 4 or 5%? Is that all of WIDA that's included in that? Other services? Because
that's.
So I was going to say, if we're talking about the Richmond ferry, maybe we ought to separate it out, because it looks like something was out of control there, or you're proposing to buy another 30 ships. But I don't think that's true. So I lost that connection there.
That number was for, that's the RM3 money used to subsidize the entire WIDA system. So we did not, in the slides, provide the data specifically on Richmond.
Oh, okay, all right. So there's nothing inherent. I mean, your proposal, at least under the Richmond Ferry, is to see that now with the new schedule, the subsidy, is to keep that going at the same. So it's going to have its normal inflation and expenses. So there's nothing unusual you're forecasting in that that's going to rise the cost up significantly then.
Yeah, we're forecasting, our normal expected historical rate of inflation, 3 to 4%. And we know that that's very speculative, and so it makes that's speculative. I covered some factors early on about ridership that make ridership inherently speculative.
Sure.
And when you take those kind of factors in combination, and you're looking out 8 years from now and identifying a 2-year funding gap. You have to kind of think about the degree of confidence that you have that, all those factors will be realized, and that, that's, how accurate is that projection. And so there's just an inherent risk in all of these assumptions that we make, and that risk increases, obviously, the further out we go in time.
Great. I would just make one final suggestion, is that because the presentation blends, it starts with the Richmond Ferry, its success, and then it goes to all of the WIDA services and everything else you're doing. It might be good to make sure that the statistics close out on the ferry portion and then go to the overall. Only for those of us that aren't as familiar with what you guys do. But again, thank you for this. And again, what a tremendous, tremendous success story. And as Chris says, she loves writing on this. So I think we all should be doing this, particularly on the weekends, for those of us that don't need to use it to commute per se. Any further questions from the board? Seeing none, Terry Ann, are there any questions from online or written questions?
No public comment, written or verbal.
Okay, great. Well, this is an information item only, and we look forward, both Mike and Seamus, to see you again in the future, and we look forward to hearing some more good news as you guys move forward. Thank you. Okay, and Ying, thank you for your presentation. Okay, this will... I'm sorry, was there anything else Ying you wanted to say?
I was just trying to clarify whether would like your specific input on the service change, whether you want to see some scenarios from WIDA, or just want to make sure this is like we.
Yeah, I think Renata was asking for that, and we all agree with that. Yes, yes, we'd like to see that, and again, it's amazing that it's only a 2-year gap given the significant increase in service. So to see some options, I think there's some probably creative ways to tweak it and maybe make it at least balance. Because if we were going to pass another measure, the measure would have to say retroactive money. That we haven't done in the past. So if it's shortfall during this period, and we want to work out that methodology so that it doesn't, it's as transparent to our taxpayers as well.
Yeah. Thank you for all the input.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, now we'll go back to item number 8A under APC, and this is an action item presented by Brian Keller on our ACFR. Used to be the CAFR, it's the ACFR now, the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report and Auditor's Report to the Authority Board for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2023, and we also have our auditor here present. So, Brian, welcome.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Brian Kelleher, the Chief Financial Officer for the authorities. We did a presentation at APC. This is the financial highlight for the agency and for my department every single year, and so it's very exciting for us to come in front of you and tell you about the financials and everything that you guys hear about and all the contracts that you do throughout the year, and discussing the ferry. I'm thinking about a 10-year fiscal plan so I can see what's going on in that piece, but all of that boils into one single year. And so what we try and do in the annual financial report is present to you a set of financials that really tells you the story of the fiscal year. So with that, I'm going to move into A little bit about what is the Aquifer. Aquifer has an introductory section. There's a transmittal letter that comes from the staff here at CCTA, and it really tells you about everything that the authority is doing. The biggest achievement we can do is every year, a lot of your cities and agencies, they go out and try and get a budget award. We do a financial award, and it's the Government Accounting Standards Board, GASB, and every single year we continue to receive that we have a good, clean audit, as well as we're doing everything that we need to do per the GASB standards. Also, into the introductory center, it's got the organizational chart. You've seen that in some of the other documents throughout the year. And then we get into the financial section. The independent auditor's report kind of goes through what they're looking for. David will talk about that in a few minutes. Management discussion and analysis is really a deep dive of a change over year over year. And sometimes with CCTA, we're a little different than a city. We don't have the same charges every single year because we have a large capital project. We get a lot of grants as well. So some of those things might be a little different, but we talk about all the projects and programs we work on. And then the fund financial statements, and then the notes to the financials, that talks about a lot of our long-term financial commitments that we have, like debt. The stats, it's the statistical section at the end. It gives a 10-year kind of history of everything that the authority does and kind of goes through those particular pieces. So if you look at the financials, and you guys have looked at these many times, is one of the biggest things you want to do is look at your assets. How much do you have in assets? And so we have about $184 million in assets compared to last year of 166. And a lot of it is increased because we have about 30 grants that are going on. Our sales tax revenues are coming up, and so our receivables are up. And as we look at our long-term liabilities, you can see it went from $518 million right in the middle of the page down to about $496. That's because we've paid off about $26 million in debt. And so when you go to the bottom, you see a total net position, a deficit. So you have negative $313 million. This is just on the books. On the books, you have a deficit because you carry long-term debt. And if you remember all the capital projects and all the bonds, and we've come and issued bonds over the years, we're paying that off every year through 2034. And so as we continue to move on, eventually all that debt's going to be paid off in 2034, and that deficit position should go away. General sales tax revenues, our sales tax revenues went up about 3% to $123 million. Other general revenues and losses, as you look at 2022, we were coming out of the pandemic, and then interest rates went really low. And so as interest rates started climbing in 2022, our holdings of about $70 million of assets, it has a market value on a piece of paper change that says if you were to sell that asset on that particular day, you would get less money because somebody can go out and buy something a little higher. So that's the change it's a GASB requirement that we report on a market value on that day. We don't lose any interest on it. We hold it to maturity. We look for opportunities to sell it and buy a higher earnings. And you could see as we had higher interest earnings in 2023, we had about $1.6 million of interest revenue. Program revenues, capital grants, operating grants and contributions to run the Innovative program, some of the capital programs. Administrative expenses, one of the biggest expenses we have is the lease we have. Those go up, and a lot of our public outreach and other opportunities for the administrative department, those prices have increased as well. And then our unallocated pension and OPEB expense, again, that's a paper entry as part of the GASB requirement to just kind of show the value from year to year. And it's always reporting 1 year in advance, our CalPERS, OPEB and pension piece, and so there's a timing on that piece as well. Project management programs, transportation projects, all of that is kind of outlined in there as well. And so your change in net position is just your change overall between your total expenses and your total revenues. You can kind of see how we're paying off the debt. We have the change in the net position at the bottom. I'd mentioned sales tax revenues increased. Federal, state, local revenues was about $19.3 million. Our capital improvement program brought in about $16.4 million. Congestion management, which is part of the planning department, is $1.4 million. And then we have our TFCA money, which is our contributions through the 511 program. That is about $1.5 million. And then on the expenditure side, administrative salaries and benefits, per our tax expenditure plan, we use a cap of 1% to pay for salaries. There's an allocation of staff members. There's a part of my salary that's in there, part of Terry Ann's salary that's in there, and some administrative salaries that are in there, and we stay below that cap. And so as we get to 2034, there will be enough in the bank to keep it going for a while to help us go through that process. Administrative services and expenditures, I mentioned the leases in there. There's also a lot of overhead and different costs for consultants and different activities to keep the organization moving forward. Program expenditures was $52 million. As you know, local street maintenance is about 20% return to source that we return to the cities. Transportation projects was $36 million. Major project expenditures, there was about $10.5 million spent on Interstate 680, State Road 4. As if you think about to July of 2022, when we were closing out some of the projects, a lot of the money was spent there. And then throughout the fiscal year, we spent about $9 million on Innovate 680. Debt service is pretty much about level debt service all the way through 2034. It's going to be roughly around $45 million. And as we continue to pay down, just like a home, the interest levels will go down. The principal payment this year was $26 million, and that will continue to increase. In the notes to disclosure, cash and investments, $139 million. $106 million is invested. We have managed investments that are about $67.7 million. We also have liquid funds and local agency investment funds, about $52.5 million. And then as we receive our sales tax on a monthly basis, we put away in a reserve fund that's held by U.S. Bank debt service funds, so that in case there's an opportunity, the debt service payments are always made. Long-term debt, there's about $374 million in outstanding bonds, and again, we paid off $26 million in fiscal year 23. Note 9 and 10, the pension plan, and other post-employment health benefits. That's another big item of topic that a lot of agencies have is liability for pension. We only have 23 employees, and so our liability is usually a lot less than a lot of other agencies. And again, as you can see in one of the slides previously, we had a change of $3.4 million in our value of our pension. It's only because we had a 21% return in fiscal year 21 with CalPERS, and then as in fiscal year 22, it was 6.1%. And so that change in value and interest earnings, it created, we're not as fully funded as we were, if that's the best way to say it. On our OPEB side, we're fully funded. We have a net asset there above what our requirement is of $816,000. And then our total net position in fund balances has changed. And again, our authority goes out in bonds, and we also go out and get grants to help build capital assets. And since the inception of Measure C and J, we've built about $2 billion in assets for the county. The statistical section in here goes through 10-year trends. It's got a lot of information about the authority and the different things that we do and how many checks we cut. That would be the operating information, and it's something nice to look at and just compare the trends year to year. And so with that, I'm going to ask David Alvey to come up here from Mays, and he's going to give you a quick presentation on the management letter that was given to the board, as well as their process of auditing the authority.
Welcome, Dave.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is David Alvey. I'm a CPA and audit partner at Mays & Associates, and I am CCTA's independent external auditor. So my role every year is to come in and audit the financial statements and to render an opinion to whether or not we think they're free from material misstatement. And before I get into kind of the audit opinion and what that means, I want to kind of go over the audit process just really high level. We started back in August with our interim phase. And during our interim phase of our audit, we don't care about materiality or dollar amounts. We want to make sure that the internal control environment is healthy. And we want to make sure that the staff are following your policies and procedures. So we look at your purchasing policy, we look at your investment policy. We want to make sure that there's enough segregation of duties that a single individual could not initiate, approve, and book a transaction with somebody else looking at it, because that would be a situation that would be ripe for error or mistake. So If there was some kind of failing of the internal control environment over a $10,000 check, that would hold just enough clout as if it was a $100,000 check in our mind. And it's a risk-based audit approach, where as we get information, we change our plan. So our plan is always moving. And then, once we get an idea of the bones or the internal control environment, when we come back at final, that happened in September, once the books are closed and we have the numbers, now we know what we need to do and how we need to test to be able to support our audit opinion. And so we start with an analytical review where we look at prior numbers over current year numbers and ask questions of staff. Why did sales tax go up? All these things. And then we test those responses. We send confirmations out right directly to your bank and your investment brokers to send stuff to us so we know how much cash and investments you have. We send confirmations for debt, legal liability. We talk to the attorneys to make sure there's not some kind of claims outstanding. And then also we look at the pension and the OPEB actuarial reports to make sure that those things are accurate as well, and then the debt transactions. At the very end of our audit process, right before we issue our opinion, we get what's called a management representation letter, and that's signed by management saying that they've given us everything in full faith. They're not withholding any information from us, and that becomes the date of our opinion. And so on page 1, and technically this is the only piece of the ACFR that my firm owns, is our audit opinion. And I'm pleased to say that it is an unmodified or clean audit opinion, and that's the highest level of assurance that a CPA firm can give you. So congratulations, you passed your audit. And what that really means is that the financial statements presented to you tonight, in my firm's opinion, are presented fairly in all material respects and correct in all material respects. The second piece you have for you tonight is the Memorandum on Internal Controls and Required Communication. Now, this is required by generally accepted auditing standards, that I tell this governing body things that I found during the audit. And they can be categorized 3 ways. A material weakness, that something material can flow through the internal controls and not get caught. None of those. Significant deficiency, that something significant can flow through and not get caught. Nothing to report there. And the other is just catch all as other matters, and I have nothing to report out. The required communication piece of that document says that we have no disagreements with management. We had no disagreements with management's accounting assumptions, because management can use accounting assumptions for like fair market value of adjustment or investments, useful life of capital assets, and even the assumptions in your pension and other post-employment benefits. Those have to be accepted by management. We don't think management was limiting our scope of our audit and not being fully truthful, and we don't think management had a second CPA firm in the wings just in case we didn't issue an unmodified opinion. We also have in your consent earlier tonight the single audit, and what that is a federal compliance audit. So you receive $6.8 million in various federal agencies, DOT, MTC money. We have to do a compliance audit for that, and no compliance findings there. And then later next month, we'll be bringing the Measure J reports. 3 recipients were selected, and we tested those, and we had no compliance issues there. And before I hand it back over to Brian, I just want to thank Brian and Yuli for all their help. This was our first year doing the audit, and it went really smooth, and that's a testament to a great finance department.
Great, thank you, David. Brian, back to you.
Thank you very much, David. With that, wish that staff recommends that you would approve the audit, and we can move on.
Thank you. First, we'll go to questions from the board. Any questions? Anybody? I will just share with you APC, since Lamar's not here. We drilled Brian and David quite a bit, and boy, they were on top of it. And David, I know, does a lot of other public agencies. We're very different because, as Brian said, we get all this money, we build something, and we give it away. So our assets get smaller and smaller as we go along. So most agencies' assets get bigger. So we're very different. Okay. Yes, Commissioner Sauce.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to reiterate what I said in the APC meeting. David, thank you so much for that plain English explanation of the audit process. It's really helpful and appreciated. And Brian, thank you for your presentation, which takes a massive amount of information and distills it for us into digestible pieces. So really appreciate it. And also the fact that this thing was squeaky clean is a testament to the fact that you're running a tight ship and that you and your staff cooperated fully with the auditors. So we appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, seeing no other comments or questions, we will open up the public comment on this. Terry-Ann, are there anybody in our virtual audience or anybody here tonight to make comments or written?
No public comment, written or verbal.
Okay. We'll then close the public comment period. Is there any further discussion or motion?
Make the motion? Sorry,
Second.
you're too slow.
I'm only a CPA. I therefore second it.
You're too slow there, too. Me too.
Wow. Okay. We are having, you snooze,
I'm
you
not
lose.
doing it.
Okay. So it's been moved by Commissioner Nowak and seconded by Commissioner Meadows. Terry-Ann, will you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Fideli?
Aye.
Commissioner Haskew?
Aye.
I'll give you the third. Commissioner Kelly?
Aye.
Commissioner Meadows? Aye. Commissioner Nowak?
Yes.
Commissioner Sauce?
Yes.
Vice Chair Arnrich?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Carlson, Perkins, Thorpe, and Chair Glover absent.
Great. Thank you, Terry-Ann. Brian and David, thank you again. We look forward to seeing you again next year at this. Brian, we'll see you probably next meeting. Okay, this next item is an action item. This is 8B, and this is going to be presented by our Terry-Ann Grover to reinstitute the Salary and Benefits Ad Hoc Committee of the Authority Board and approve an agreement with Gallagher Benefit Services Incorporated to conduct a total compensation study. Terry-Ann, it's all yours.
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners, and Representatives. This item is brought before you every 3 years to provide an opportunity to adopt a salary and benefits compensation plan for the upcoming 3 fiscal years. Our current plan expires on June 30th, 2024. The total compensation study may take 12 to 16 weeks to complete, so we want to ensure that there's adequate time for the study and for a Salary and Benefits Ad Hoc Committee to be formed and provide the review and input in order to seek approval by June. The study seeks to survey all active authority classifications except the executive director against comparable positions with agencies selected for the study. More challenging comparisons for supervisory and managerial positions may require other weighting factors. During the 2018 study, the board adopted 9 comparator agencies consisting of the Bay Area Congestion Management Agencies and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which we may look to expand during this study. During the 2021 study, the board adopted salary ranges based on a market median plus 10% in alignment with the authority's philosophy of being an employer of choice and market leader. We anticipate this study to continue with that same philosophy, and it will ensure that we are competitive and remain an employer of choice. Previously, the ad hoc committee was established for the purpose of providing policy input and review and development of the recommendations from the study for authority board approval. The board is responsible for appointing 5 commissioners to the ad hoc committee. In the past, it consisted of the authority board chair and vice chair, administration and projects chair, the planning committee chair, and then 1 additional commissioner. But this is left to the discretion of the board, and we want to ensure there is regional representation and that we do not have a quorum of members from either of the subcommittees. The ad hoc committee will likely meet 2 to 3 times over the next few months. For the study, quotes were solicited from human resources consultants. We received 2 proposals, one from our current on-call human resources consulting team, Regional Government Services, and then one from Gallagher Benefit Services, which was formerly Coffin Associates, both of which have handled prior studies for the authority. The quote from COF was more competitive, and the team has vast experience and knowledge working with our agency and similar agencies from our comparators list, and therefore we are recommending entering into an agreement with Gallagher to conduct the study. One of the differences with this current study is the pending completion of the organizational assessment, which we will present to the board at a future meeting. It is anticipated that new classifications will be recommended as we move towards CCTA 4.0 and advancing the organization. The assessment also seeks to identify staffing gaps, gaps in career ladders, ensure succession planning, and identify the executive team. Gallagher will work with staff to develop the new classifications and a salary and benefits benchmark so that the new classifications can be added to the publicly available pay schedule that we will adopt as part of this in June. And then that will be approved by the authority board at that time. Even though we will be studying these additional classifications from the assessment, it doesn't indicate that we need to hire or fill these new classifications. They will strictly be for the publicly available pay schedule, and we will be evaluating them on an as-needed basis. and they will be subject to the approval of the Authority Board at that time. The total amount of this contract includes additional funding for this purpose. Staff recommends reinstituting the Salary and Benefits Ad Hoc Committee, that the board appoint 5 commissioners to the ad hoc committee at their choosing, and authorize the chair to execute an agreement with Gallagher to conduct the study, with the ultimate goal of adopting a salary and benefits compensation plan for Authority employees for the period of July 1st, 2024 through June 30th, 2027. That concludes my presentation. I'll take any questions that you may have.
Terry Ann, you're always so good at this. Very precise. We all respect that. Thank you for that. We'll start off, any questions or comments from the board? Okay, seeing none, we will open up any public comment. Is there anybody here tonight who would like to make public comment? So please step forward. And are there any virtual ones or written comments on this item?
No public comment, verbal or written.
Okay, then we will close public comment on this item and back to the board. So we have an option before us to do, we could do one motion and approve the contract and the appointments, or if you choose, we can do them individually. Either way works. Sue?
I'm going to make a motion to do both.
Okay.
And I'm going to move that we, one, accept the contract as requested, and then 2, reconstitute the board with a similar layout. So that would be Federal and Newell from the board, the chairs of the 2 subcommittees, Lamar and Scott Perkins, and then to round out sort of a regional concept, add Chris Kelly to that.
Great, thank you.
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded, so moved by Noack, seconded by Sauce. Any further discussion? Sorry, roll call, please.
Commissioner Fidelli?
Aye.
Commissioner Haskell?
Aye.
Commissioner Kelly? Aye. Commissioner Meadows?
Aye.
Commissioner Nowak?
Yes?
Commissioner Sauce?
Yes.
Vice Chair Arnovich?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Carlson, Perkins, Thorpe, and Chair Glover absent.
Great, thank you. And Terry Ann, again, thank you for that very concise report.
Thank
This is
you.
very timely, and we look forward to the results of that. Okay, this will take us to our next item, and this is going to be presented by Ivan Ramirez on the State Route 4 McCollum Bike Trail Pedestrian Overcrossing Project, seeking approval to suspend retention holdings and a partial release of the retention to Joseph Albanese, Inc. for construction services performed in the project. And I think you're going to give us an update what's going on. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Ivan Ramirez, Director of Construction. And this is the project that has encountered numerous challenges. We have updated the board on several locations, so there's a lot of things that have happened in the project. However, we're at the point now where we're almost done. The amount of work that remains to be done is pretty minimum, but it takes a long time to get it done. I was explaining to Commissioner Kelly some of the work, and it's kind of tedious, but the bottom line is that the contractor, if it weren't for all the issues that we have encountered, they would have been gone by now. And they have asked us if we will be willing to release most of the retention, because it has a cash flow issue for them when they don't have the money. It's over $400,000. And, the public contract code establishes that we have to retain 5% as the work progresses. In the past, and according to the public contract code, we have asked the board to stop collecting after 50% of the work is done. This time, we didn't do that, so we have basically kept the 5% throughout. And because the progress is at the point we're almost done, the contractor's almost done, it's not their fault that they're out there right now, we're asking the board to release most of the retention. We're going to keep $30,000 because we always need to keep a certain amount to make sure that work is done. So we're going to be coming back to you in the next month or two and asking you to release the remainder once the project is accepted. But other than that, I am open to any questions, but I think you did a good job of reading what the request is, Commissioner Aldrich. So I'm entertaining any questions right now.
Okay, and I would just add that this is about 80% of the retention, but they're over 90% completed, so that's balanced. And secondly, the issues on the site weren't theirs, they were design errors. The design errors have been corrected, and they've been implementing those. So the project is back on track. So any questions from commissioners? Seeing none, then we'll go to open for public comment. Is there anybody virtual or in the room that'd like to make public comment? Terry Ann, or written?
No public comment, written or verbal.
Okay, then we will close public comment, bring it back to the board for action.
Okay, thank you so much. I move this item forward, please.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Haskew, seconded by Commissioner Meadows. Is there any further discussion? It's all kicks and giggles up here tonight. Seeing no further discussion, Terry, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Fideli?
Aye.
Commissioner Haskew?
Aye.
Commissioner Kelly? Aye. Commissioner Meadows?
Aye.
Commissioner Nowak?
Yes.
Commissioner Sauce?
Yes.
Vice Chair Arnrich? Motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Carlson, Perkins, Thorpe, and Chair Glover absent.
Thank you, and Ivan, thank you for staying on top of this. Thank you. All right, the next item is from the planning committee. It's be presented by John Wong to add an East County representative to the subcommittee of the Authority Board for Development Company-wide CTP 2050 plan. Welcome.
Good evening, Vice Chair Arnrich and Commissioners. John Long, Director of Planning. Here we are again. At last month's board meeting, the board approved the formation of a subcommittee for the CTP Countywide Transportation Plan Development to assist staff in guiding policies, and also appointed three members of the board to that committee. For tonight, staff is requesting that the board appoint a fourth member to represent East County, Costa County. With that, I'll return to the board, Chair.
Is that a record? Terry Ann, you're not done. Okay. Thank you. Comments, questions from the commission? Seeing none, are there any public comments either in the room or virtual or written, Terry Ann?
No public comment, written or verbal.
Seeing none, we will close that and back to the board for action. Mr. Meadows.
I move that we appoint Commissioner Thorpe to CTP 2050 Subcommittee.
I'll second that.
Okay. It's good. Okay. It's been moved by Commissioner Meadows, seconded by Commissioner Sauce. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Terry, call the roll.
Commissioner Fideli?
Aye.
Commissioner Haskew?
Aye.
Commissioner Kelly? Aye. Commissioner Meadows?
Aye.
Commissioner Nowak?
Yes.
Commissioner Sauce?
Yes.
Vice Chair Arnrich?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously with Commissioners Carlson, Perkins, Thorpe, and Chair Glover absent.
Thank you. And thank you to the commission for getting this one wrapped up. So, John, thank you. Okay, this takes us to item number 10, and we have two correspondence letters that are in your packet there, associated committee reports. There are a couple of cancellation notices in there. Those are all listed. Now we go to item number 12, and this is authority board comments. No comments from the chair. Is there any commissioner comments?
I guess I'll make a little comment on MTC board. We approved taking enabling legislation to in order to get a regional transportation measure done at the earliest in 2026. There had been a significant amount of discussion in past meetings on this. There had been a lot of pressure to figure out how to address the fiscal cliff and a regional transportation measure, a lot of discussion on consolidation, which raises a lot of concerns. So the enabling legislation basically went to more of a coordination focus rather than a consolidation focus. And it also left very broad terms for what type of revenue measure might be pursued. So that enabling legislation should be going forward to, I believe Scott Wiener's going to be shepherding that through the process in Sacramento, and we will wait till see any responses on that.
Great, thank you. I was just reporting out since I happened to be in Washington, D.C., and I did, last week, I did participate in a couple of meetings, got to meet with Laura Mendley, who is with UC Berkeley's ITS, Institute for Transportation Studies, which also includes the Davis campus, UCLA, and one other spot, in becoming a partner with our Gomentum project on workforce development. Also met with Dr. Palch? Philbrick. I always say Palch. Philbrick, and she is the CEO of the Mineta Institute, Transportation Institute. And on the spot, after Tim made a presentation, she said, I'm in, just send me the paperwork. And they are going to help us, and they will help fund doing workforce development to show the value, particularly to the state of California and to the federal government and to our local jurisdictions here, the positive economic impact that a new Gomentum station would have. We also got to meet with the Department of Energy, and you go, why would you meet with the Department of Energy? Well, they have a special technical area on transportation, and we met with those folks and had 2 people in there, and Tim will report out later, and also with our local Congress members, Mark DeSaulnier and John Garamendi. And I have to tell you, John Garamendi, Mark got called away to go vote, basically go vote no. He says, that's why I'm in Washington. And we just got John when he had just finished voting no and came back. And he's the type of person that sits around the table, and if you met him before, he wants to solve the problem right there. Get out the paper, start punching it out. And it was really great to watch that, get him engaged, and every moment went along, he asked more questions, and he really began to understand what Gomentum, why we were thinking of a possible move, what that would do for the county, and particularly for the state of California. So that's it on my reporting. And now, any other comments from staff? Executive Director report. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, Mark.
Thank you, Vice Chair Arndrich. Happy New Year, first off, and a brief BART update, which includes a thank you to CCTA and my commissioner colleagues for assisting us in getting new fare gates installed. Your financial support and just support in general has always been positive, and understanding what the riders need, so thank you for all of those years of working with us to make this accomplishment actually occur. So the last week of December, we installed our first array of new fare gates at our West Oakland station. They're actually doing a great job of preventing those individuals that are not paying their fare from entering the system. I spent an hour or so people watching there, and folks will come down from the platform, see the gates, turn around and go back up, because they realize they aren't going to be able to fare evade at that station anymore. So it has done exactly what we would hope it would do, and ultimately will bring us revenue and ensure that our ridership is improved. Just to give you an idea, we're piloting these for the next month or 2, and at that point in May or June, we're going to begin installation at 8 additional stations, which include 2 Contra Costa stations, end-of-line stations. So our Richmond and our Antioch stations will both be getting new fare gates. And really the goal for us is to replace all 700-plus fare gates in the system across 50 stations by the end of next year. Wow. So we have a very aggressive timeline. We had an aggressive timeline to get the pilot installed. That was under budget and ahead of schedule. So both good things in the world of construction. And lastly, if you're on your way to San Francisco and you want to take a few-minute detour, stop at West Oakland, jog down the stairs and take a look at the fare gates. They are very, very quiet. No more clunking like in the traditional fare gates. It's a very, very almost relaxing experience. So with that, I will turn it back to you, Vice Chair. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Foley. Awesome, well done. All right, now I'll turn it over to our Executive Director, Tim Hills.
Well, again, Happy New Year, first meeting of the year for 2024, and welcome back. Hope everyone had a great holiday. I think not much to report out on other than we went over to Transportation Research Board. A number of us and staff actually attended Transportation Research Board, and extremely valuable opportunity, I think, to really, one, network, but two, really get to do a deep dive and have an opportunity to do a deep dive into some good, topics around either digital twinning. Stephanie Hu, our Director of Projects, attended a great session on digital twinning, and other folks attended sessions on cloud-based transit signal priority systems, also Vision Zero. I mean, every topic is there, and so it was great for staff to kind of nerd out a little bit on some of our favorite topics at TRB. And also, and meanwhile, Lindy Johnson and I, our Director of External Affairs, and I, and Chair Arnrich, or Vice Chair Arnrich, attended several meetings on the Hill. And so those were very, very fruitful, as Vice Chair Arnrich pointed out. A lot of the meetings that I was in last week were really focused on Gomentum Station 2.0 and workforce development. Really the feedback that we're getting on the Hill in this space is really focused on the labor question, and not so much necessarily on the technology piece, but really focused on labor and how we're going to address labor in this space. And so it was very, very timely to bring these proposals to the Hill on workforce development, and also get the support from our local delegation here. I also met with Senator Padilla's staff as well, and they're very excited about it. And then Vice Chair Arnrich met with our members, Garamendi and DeSaulnier. You may remember last year we actually started a coalition called the Automated Connected Electric Shared Coalition, so I want to kind of provide a quick update on that. And that's been really exciting to see that fully develop. I'm the chair and president of the coalition, and there's actually 17 public members, actually no, 15 public members, 2 private members as part of the coalition, and all your usual suspects of the more innovative public sector transit agencies across the country are part of this coalition. And we had over 14 of our board members there, and we actually split up into groups and had 27 meetings on the Hill on Thursday, basically really promoting our coalition in terms of really public sector led. And it was really very well received because most of these folks are hearing from labor and from the private sector and not from the public sector in a coalition manner, as a single voice. And so they were very excited about it, especially the T&I committee and the Senate Commerce committees. They were very excited to see that the public sector is really coming together on this and really joining forces. And they are basically saying they're going to invite us back to testify to Congress on what we're doing and what our priorities for in this space is. So very fruitful meetings. And then on Gomentum Station 2.0, staff and I have been in a lot of meetings, as you can tell from the executive director report, really kind of teeing this whole thing up with GoBiz, as well as labor, and also with our university partners, UCLA, UC Irvine, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, and Mineta Transportation Institute, and also our local community colleges, the California Workforce Development Board, as well as the Contra Costa Workforce Development Board. So there's been a lot of meetings to kind of build the momentum behind this to create the California Innovation Alliance to really support Gomentum Station as a hub in this space. So those were the 2 big things that went on. The other big thing that went on this month is I interviewed Representative and Director Foley on the Patio podcast, and we had an opportunity to sit down and talk about BART. It was a great conversation about BART and the safe and clean recovery plan, the next generation fare gates, and their kind of whole plan around addressing the transit fiscal cliff and adjustments to service, et cetera. So very, very fruitful. I should be posted soon. And that is pretty much it. That concludes my presentation.
Tim, thank you. I just add, Mark Smith in the DOE, and that's Vehicle Technologies Group, he just couldn't wait to see the presentation because he says, you're the only people that ever show up and actually tell us what you did, and you're already working on the new projects. They're so used to, and that was true across all the people we met. Most of the other agencies are talking about projects they've been working on 5-10 years and they've gotten nowhere. So, we're back there also setting a foundation, making sure that everybody knows we are submitting for another mega grant. This is a significant funding, and as you know, it's the agencies that approve the grants, not our legislators. But we will need support letters and things like that. But each agency is there having our staff making presentations at the conference when they were also participating there was pretty impressive. So with that, the rest of everything is in your calendars. It's in our packet. And with that, we will then, I guess we're not technically adjourning the meeting. We will go to a closed session. And we will exit the board meeting, go over to the small meeting room, the Diablo Conference Room. And this is a conference with legal counsel on anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9D2 and one case.
Recording stopped.
Always exciting. Hey, Bruce.
Tim, you run a great program here.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you. How you doing? Yeah, you doing good?
Oh, yeah.